world leaders and great minds gather, it's time to ponder and chart the course amid the chill of global changes. See the spring of openness and the blossoming of innovation. World Insights host Tian Wei brings you fresh views and meaningful talks on site. Tune in to World Insight for its special coverage on the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2018.
Hello, you're watching a special program of World Insight from Boao. I'm Tian Wei. Coming up on today's program, an exclusive interview with Jean-Pierre Raffarin, former Prime Minister of France, on the latest escalation of trade dispute between China and the U.S., and his discussion with President Xi Jinping of China on the style of governance for today's world. Later in the show, I'm also going to be joined by two key figures at this year's Boao on openness and innovation. The trade tensions between the United States and China has been escalating since the U.S. side decided to slash heavy tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods going to the country. The dispute has created quite some sense of uncertainty for the world economy. Take a look at this first.
With a heated discussion on trade friction with the U.S., China is welcoming guests from around the world to its 2018 Boao Forum. On Wednesday, Chinese President Xi Jinping will deliver a speech, which will likely touch upon China's next move. At the beginning of April, Trump administration announced that the U.S. would release a list of some 1,300 products that could be targeted with a 25% tariff, worth a total of $50 billion based on the results of an investigation into China's alleged theft of U.S. intellectual property. Right after that, Beijing announced that it would fight fire with fire. China published a list of U.S. imports, also worth $50 billion, on which it will levy a 25% tariff. China's hit list was smaller, but targeted to hurt sensitive U.S. sectors, such as soybean farming. In some of the major soybean farming U.S. states, Mr. Trump's action has backfired.
I want to tell the Trump administration that, we're the people that put you here in rural America, and you're trying to hurt us for a little gain in a small segment of the economy.
It's a very politically sensitive spot for the president, who relied on some of that farming vote from the Midwest in order to win the White House. Also in Pennsylvania, Michigan, these states were very critical to the president. So yes, they could be hurt in this process.
China has repeatedly warned the U.S. that any unilateral move of levying tariffs on Chinese goods will be met with countermeasures.
This is a unilateralist and protectionist action. We will certainly fight back.
On Sunday, President Trump tweeted that taxes will become reciprocal and a deal will be made on intellectual property. The tweet didn't explain why he was optimistic about resolving the U.S.-China trade friction, but President Trump said he and Chinese President Xi Jinping would always be friends, no matter what happens with our dispute on trade.
That's a brief wrap-up of the trade dispute between the United States and China. No wonder it has become the headline for discussion at this year's Boao Forum as well. On that, I invited Jean-Pierre Raffarin, former French Prime Minister, for an in-depth discussion. Prime Minister Raffarin is an extremely firm and outspoken person on this. China-U.S. trade dispute, we see some apparent escalation of it. So, Mr. Prime Minister, what do you make of the latest round?
It's a bad thing, and we think that protectionism is not a good way in such a dangerous world. We need to have agreement, we need to have dialogue, and we don't like that one country take alone decisions against another. We think that we have to answer with multilateral dialogue. That's a subject about what Mr. Macron talked with President Xi. And I think they agree we need to have multilateral dialogue to discuss this situation.
But Mr. Prime Minister, you know, people say, well, the European countries could be quite tricky in a way, because if heavy tariffs are being levied on Chinese goods, well, the Europeans are being exempted by the Americans from the heavy tariffs, then the Europeans, when they become realistic, they could just watch whatever is going on and never say a word.
That's a bad situation. We can't have one president, Mr. Trump, who is decided alone what happens with the world trade. We need to have cooperation. We need to discuss together. That's the reason why we have answered to the United States that we want to discuss in a multilateral size and not only bilateral discussion.
You mean, Mr. Prime Minister, even though the American, for example, the Trump administration give, let's just say, French exemption from the heavy tariffs, you will still proceed with a multilateral platform. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's our position. We are thinking that we need a world agreement.
But what about within the European Union? We know some countries are very outspoken about this, like France. Other countries could be tricky. So will France be able to stand on its own, saying this is what we believe, or it has to come with a quote-unquote consensus coming from the European Union, and then it becomes tricky?
I think that nowadays Mr. Macron has leadership enough to explain to his partners that we need to have multilateral discussion. And it could be a bad orientation to decide inch by inch.
People have been saying tariffs is a tool back in the 1980s. Remember, Mr. Prime Minister? But today, it has been very different when it comes to the world order and the way people interact with one another. So is tariff the way, or there should be much more inspirational ideas in order to solve what we have today?
Mr. Macron gives a good answer. We need to have a balanced cooperation. We need to have trade cooperation, and this cooperation must be balanced. We have to decide a lot of steps to have, in turn, balanced cooperation. And we can't have only short-term discussion. We need to have a long-term vision.
But the U.S. midterm election is just a few months from now.
Yes,
the presidential election only 2 years from now. So I'm not sure they're with you about that reason.
Yes, I think that that's the reason why Mr. Trump is on a wrong way, because we need to have a balanced world. We need to have multipolarity. We need to have a balanced trade. So it's not possible to have a balanced trade in short term. We need to take decision for the future to reach a good situation, which is a balanced trade.
You remember, Mr. Prime Minister, with your political wisdom and also your knowledge of history, at the very beginning of the 20th century, in the 1930s, we have seen once again in the 1980s, issues like that, trade protectionism popped up, which all led to certain kinds of, first of all, the First World War, the Second World War, and certainly a Cold War. So now we see the protectionism rise again. People wonder, what would all of this mean for us, short term, and even more fearful about the long term?
The reason why the world is very dangerous right now. We have a lot of tensions, we have a lot of wars everywhere, we have terrorism, and we can't have, with now the news, we can't have economic war everywhere. So we need to share what we can call the consensus of Teng. We need reforms, and we need openness. I have seen how China is becoming again a great country with reforms and openness. Nowadays, every country needs to make reforms, but we need openness. It's stupid to make reforms and to close the borders. We need to be open, and that's the reason why we have a very important growth in China for the last years. It's the reason of the opening economy. And now it's very strange, but Deng Xiaoping, 40 years after his decision for China, is a good vision for everywhere.
But now the complaint is the WTO is not moving fast enough to catch up with all the changes. That we all know. But the question is how? How to make that balance? On the one hand, you rely on international platforms, which tends to be slow, because you need to consult. But on the other hand, you really have urgent issues to resolve.
It's a very difficult question, but we know that we can choose the scenario of the past. We know that with nationalism, with protectionism, and with terrorism, and so on, at the end, we have war, we have fights. So we can't take this way. So we have to work together. That's the reason why France and China have agreed to have multilateral solution. Right now, the bilateral policy is the main policy everywhere. Mr. Putin has discussion with Mr. Erdogan, Mr. Trump wants to make the war with Mr. Xi, and so on everywhere. It's not possible to have a world of peace with only bilateral interests. We need to have a multilateral discussion. We need to have win-win cooperation. That's the reason why Belt and Road Initiative, for me, is an initiative for financial question, for infrastructures, for economic problems, but it's a project for peace.
I know you're very passionate about Belt and Road Initiative. Many people coming to Boao are. We're going to talk about that later, but for now, I want to push a little bit further on this question. Mr. Prime Minister, the question is, what's next, right? I mean, do you think things will get ever worse, or probably much worse?
I think that things will be improved in the next future, because there is no solution for the United States to keep in this way. So I am optimistic.
And you also heard from China that in the next years, Chinese, according to the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, once a week ago in a speech, is likely to purchase 8 trillion worth of goods from all over the world in order to balance the trade and also in order to contribute, and of course to change China's economic structures too. How much opportunity do you think that would provide, in a way, about the structural changes, reform and opening up that we talked about earlier for the other countries?
Firstly, is an answer to the United States. And we can't have a discussion which is only between two big nations. And when this decision has been taken, Mr. Macron has called Mr. Xi, and he has called also Mr. Trump, and he said, discuss together in this situation. We need to have a discussion at a large scale. So I think that China has no solution if they don't take such a decision, because they have to answer. But it's a short-term answer. We have to organize the discussion right now.
Belt and Road Initiative, many people see it in 2 layers. One, their interaction with China. The other thing is much more multilateral than just with China, because it's a platform everybody could talk to each other and cross-talk in a way. How do you think this will provide some immediate opportunities for countries, whether large or small, Mr. Prime Minister?
It's a bit difficult because we need to have an European answer, because we have a plan, for example, for infrastructures. It's called the Juncker Plan, and we make a lot of investment in infrastructure. So we have to coordinate what we organize with the Juncker Plan and what we can do with the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think that in the beginning of July, we will have a common answer from the European Commission about Belt and Road Initiative and the participation of Europe, with a good coordination between our own investments and the investments in the initiative of Mr. Xi.
So from now to July, not very long time, I'll have to say, Mr. Prime Minister, when it comes to drawing up with a plan. So what is that last mile for the European Union to come up with a consensus? What is it about?
We have already organized a work. For example, in my country, I am in charge of discussion with industrial people, with regions, with a lot of actors to find some big projects in infrastructures to propose to the Chinese to invest together. So I think we will be ready at the beginning of the summer to propose some initiative to our partner in Belt and Road Initiative.
Do you think there will still be enough momentum among those countries, France included, to participate and push forward with even more efficiency about the plan?
If we can choose good projects.
Yes.
We don't need to have a global discussion.
What is a good project for you?
I think good project is project which is already engaged between France and China, and with companies who are working together already. And they can develop this project on the road. So, for example, we have 5 or 6 projects, and I think that the French Minister of Foreign Affairs will be in China in a few weeks, and he will propose some projects. I think we need to have concrete discussion, not theoretical discussion. What we want to do. Yes. Are you agree with my project or not? If you agree, actions.
You are a fan of always studying governance, lifelong learning about governance. You even read the book of Chinese President Xi Jinping talking about governance. You even you even took some notes about that too, and compare notes with the Chinese President Xi Jinping when you saw him last time. I wonder what was his response to you?
These books are very important. Why? Because Mr. Xi writes what he wants to do. That's the reason why I have said many times China is predictable. The 19th Congress is not a surprise. We have seen what the President wants to do, and we have seen what he has written, and we have seen a lot of signal of his action. So I think that the distance of humanity, Belt and Road Initiative, that's not new ideas. The fight against corruption, that's not a new idea. Right. That's a very clear strategy. In a few years, Mr. Xi is becoming a world leader. He is a leader, and he has a very strong leadership.
Mr. Prime Minister, you've been a leader, and you have always been one who's cultivating the governance styles. I want to ask you, what kind of leadership do we want in our world today? Because we see the style of leadership in the current White House. We also see the style of leadership in different parts of the world, of course in China as well. What kind of leadership do you think, Mr. Prime Minister, at the dramatic change time that we need?
We need to have leaders with projects, and not only for their country, but for every country. I think that now we need to have cooperation against war. We need to have international cooperation. That's the reason why protectionism is the wrong way. We need to have international cooperation against war. And for having international cooperation, we have to propose projects. You know, Belt and Road is a big project, of course for China, of course for Asia, but also for other countries. And that's a very big 1,000 billion of dollars. It's something like 10 more than Marshall Plan in the past. So it's very important, and it's a project for corporations against war.
Right.
And the leaders nowadays is a man who is able to propose to the other projects which are good for his country, of course. Everybody has to work for his country and for his people, but also for the other.
That is Jean-Pierre Raffarin, former French Prime Minister, talking to me earlier here in Boao Forum. Coming up, our discussion on innovation and openness. This year's Boao Forum is more than significant, not only because the Chinese President Xi Jinping is to attend the forum and expected to deliver an important speech at a time of critical change and uncertainty, but also the forum marks the 40th years anniversary of reform and opening up here in China. It is a time to think about the road of openness and innovation ahead. On those topics, I invited Leif Johansen, former chairman of Ericsson and also member of the board of Boao Forum for Asia, and Leslie Masdorp, vice president of the New Development Bank. But first, this.
The annual Boao Forum for Asia opened Sunday in China's Hainan province. The forum this year will run under the theme, An Open and Innovative Asia for a World of Greater Prosperity, which underscores a commitment to take up more responsibilities in global affairs. Chinese President Xi Jinping will attend the forum for the 4th time in 8 years. He'll be joined by other heads of state and government, including leaders from Austria, the Philippines, Mongolia, the Netherlands, Pakistan, and Singapore.
China firmly supports the opening up of Asian countries and its cooperation with other parts of the world. This is to benefit the common development of not only Asia, but also the world as a community.
The Boao Forum, initiated by 25 Asian countries and Australia, started as a means to promote Asia's economic integration. It has gradually shifted its focus to global issues. But now, globalization faces a range of unprecedented challenges. During 4 days of meetings, world leaders, the movers and shakers, will talk about ways to adjust and prosper in the new era.
When world leaders and great minds gather, it's time to ponder and chart the course. Amid the chill of global changes, see the spring of openness and the blossoming of innovation. World Insights host Tian Wei brings you fresh views and meaningful talks on site. Tune in to World Insight for its special coverage on the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2018.
And I'm joined here in our studio of CGTN in Boao, Leif and Leslie. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to see you. Let's talk about innovation, which is a topic I guess both love in a way. Yet innovation, when it comes to Ericsson, for example, You have been instrumental in the growing of that company. But you have also seen challenges as a result of innovation elsewhere. For example, 4G vis-a-vis 5G. So what is your take, Leif, about innovation, the speed of innovation?
I think the speed of innovation is forever increasing, and one of that is the fact that we can now see innovation being done in many different countries, and we can actually assimilate that innovation into our own countries much quicker. So that's one reason. The other reason is the development of information technology, which actually drives the ability to compute much quicker, but also the ability to communicate. So if you can communicate everything in a fast way up to, for example, a cloud, then you can actually get computer resources very well available to you from the cloud, which you cannot afford or do yourself. So even if you're a small entrepreneur, you can actually use the computing power of a very large computer in the cloud at a very, very low cost. And of course that does drive innovation.
All right.
Communication in itself means that you can connect all parts of the world at the same speed. So that means that you can go from local to global in a very, very quick way. You can roll out from local to global very, very quickly. And of course the combination of that means that if there's a good innovation in China, that can be rolled out in Sweden and likewise.
Or in the emerging economies. Is that what also you have in mind, innovation?
Absolutely. I'm in fact hoping that this theme around innovation, which is the theme of Boao this year, will dominate more, and that the issues around the sort of trade, wars...
Oh, it's the media, as they say.
Innovation is real because, as Leif said, the possibility it offers for developing countries to use that as a lever to go to the next stage of the development. And this is in our industry, for example, in infrastructure finance, there is such exciting possibilities that this new wave of technology offers. You know, in the age of in the age of sort of electronic vehicles and driverless cars, what kind of roads do we need to build? What does a transport network of the future look like, right? Where the physical world becomes digitized, right? Where you have industrial sensors all over and almost kind of, you know, setting the physical world alive with the possibilities. So I hope that over the next few days there'll be a real dialogue about what that next wave could mean for developing economies.
But talking about innovation, as emerging economies, it is a latecomer. We have to accept the fact. Absolutely. It's just a matter of fact. And therefore, some of the technological innovations were not originally done by these emerging economies. But these economies' market size is huge. So it could come up with a lot of adaptive innovation on its own. While at the same time, its talent is growing, the world is becoming global. Therefore, technologies and new innovations are coming these days, gradually, and more from these countries. How do you see that trend, Leslie?
Look, I mean, there's already been some exciting developments over the last 10 years, as you know. Let's take mobile payments, for example. You had the development of M-Pesa in Kenya, in an area where there was very poor access to financial services. You had a country here able to leapfrog, where people who never had access to a bank account, a physical branch, immediately moved over to a mobile account and able to conduct mobile transactions without never having had walked into a physical bank. In a similar way, technology today offers that possibility for many of our developing countries to simply leapfrog and adopt what the latest that Ericsson and other companies offer. I mean, 5G, I was talking to Leif before the interview, 5G offers just unimagined new possibilities.
A totally new world.
Combined with robotics and AI. And for me, it's really how could we use these technologies to improve people's lives? That should be the focus. What could these technologies be? How could we use these technologies to remove and reduce hunger in the world, to reduce inequality and poverty?
We should work on those issues. Before we work on those issues, there's also the competition issue. I mean, think about it. You have the new comers in the field, new kids on the block in a way, Leif. For example, coming from China, Huawei, or coming from other parts of the world, challenging the existing well-established innovation players, for example, Ericsson. So how do you see this map now?
I think it is, if you like innovation and you're a proponent of innovation, then you cannot say, but if it comes from there, then it's not good. So therefore, I would say that there will always be new innovative companies. There will always be competition coming from other countries. And we should do our best as a company to really respond to that and compete and be more innovative and see that as a way for our company to be better. The only point that's important is that competition is done at a level playing field, where competition is had at the same time. And of course that's again why I'm arguing for a rule-based economy and rule-based trade. If you look at the rules are not bad as they are. There may be need of reform in the rules, but that's fine. Then you can argue that, and you can sit down and in a diplomatic way agree that. The fact that we may be moving away from a rule-based trade sounds almost too terrible to even have a risk for. What we have now in a very good part of the world, big part of the world, in the US, here and in Europe, we have actually very good innovation going on in technology. And to not spread that around the world in a quick fashion, I think is to the detriment of the world economy and frankly for human well-being. So if anything that we do that sort of limits the spread of innovation, I think is not good.
But I think, you know, as Leif will tell you, in his industry, telecoms and in all the other industries, really, you can see how the world is so interconnected and intertwined. You know, a trade war today versus, let's say, 50 or 80 years ago is a very different proposition. So if you look at a product, let's say like iPhone, or I don't know about iPhone when it's sitting next to Ericsson, but you know, these things are assembled here. Doesn't mean, if you look at the global value chain, not all the IP comes from one country. So it is very difficult to push this to its logical conclusion, because the world is so integrated and interconnected that the world's biggest economy, the US and China, need each other. For the US to prosper, they issue debt. Who do you think buy the US treasuries?
Right.
China is a very large creditor to the US. And if you walk into Walmart or Target or any big US store, most of those goods are manufactured in China. So there's such an interconnectedness that it is not in either one's interest to let this lead to a trade war.
In my own company at Ericsson, well, we have 22 countries involved in producing one product.
And that is only one product.
That's one product. And if you start thinking about how that comes across different industries, automotive, etc., then you really end up in a very, very not black and white picture. You end up in a very complex organizational thing that is going to take decades to change if new regimes actually come in. So very profound effects on everything that has to do with supply chains.
Yes, indeed. The world has already got its own order.
Yeah.
So do not try to destroy that already existing good order. This year, China's 40 years of reform and opening up. This is a big occasion. It is an occasion that people should rally together to see what kinds of momentum China has and how it's working with the rest of the world. I think that has a lot to do with the question you just addressed.
Absolutely. And we have a situation now. China is a unique country in the history of the world. It has gone from being a clearly emerging country or a developing country into a now, in many parts of its economy, very developed country. And therefore, of course, that impact on the rest of the world is very different to what it was only 20 or 40 years ago. So I think we see a very reformed, opened up China, and one that should take its rightful place in the world economy on a level playing field.
Right. Chinese President Xi Jinping is going to be here in Boao, and he's going to lay out some of the future measures of China when it comes to reform and opening up. From emerging countries' perspective, what are you expecting?
I mean, I think a lot of the themes have already been echoed at the 19th Party Congress. I think, you know, this shift from, you know, quantity of growth before towards more quality growth, this shift towards a focus on the green economy and moving the engines of the propellers of growth towards enabling a environmentally sustainable future. I think he is going to also emphasize again the importance of trade and openness, because that is a theme of the conference here, because it's all about Asian integration. It's more than likely that he will talk about Belt and Road, because that is such an ambitious economic strategy and about connecting economies here in the region. And that's what banks like ourselves and others are trying to do, to enable countries to integrate their economies more. So I think there's going to be a continuation of those themes, but a huge focus on this quality of growth.
Absolutely.
And we spoke about competition earlier, and I think People are now no longer just looking at economic growth through GDP lenses, but looking at how many new firms are we creating versus established ones. How much money is going into R&D and innovation. How much retraining is happening of workers. So a lot more. That's not the traditional measures that you use to evaluate growth. I'm hoping that you will also focus on those.
Belt and Road Initiative, both of you are very passionate about. One is try to provide ways of funding for it and try to come up with new ideas. The other is to see what kind of cooperation that can be connectivity created and telecommunication, what role is going to play. So what is it going to be like in the very near term? Because we really need to present people something so that people can build on top of that. Let's go to you first, Leslie.
Look, it's early days. Although the Belt and Road concept came about way back in 2013, about 5 years ago already, it is such a long-term, ambitious economic strategy. It will go through different phases. Firstly, it's not only about just building new infrastructure. It's also about rehabilitating existing, crumbling infrastructure and connecting these economies more. So it might take on different shapes and form as it evolves. It's very difficult to say now what it will look like in 10 or 15 or 20 years. What we do know is that it's going to be a driver of new growth in Asia. There is no question about that. Cross-border between these various countries.
What do we know?
Well, I think let me make the point that when we talk about infrastructure, intellectual infrastructure, information technology, communication, etc., is just as valid as infrastructural project as is roads. And I think this is very good insight that's established here in China and needs to be established in other parts of the world. I was in Canada 2 weekends ago and inaugurated the corridor between Ontario and Quebec of 5G communication. It's actually, physically you can say a corridor, but a PPI, public-private partnership, that is invested into a corridor, just to test what the corridor like that can actually do. World's first rollout of 5G over a big area rather than only testing areas. I think those are the types of really innovative infrastructural projects that you should add to the necessary building of the physical infrastructure.
Right. Before we go, we noticed there are several key words for this year's Boao: openness, innovation, and prosperity. If I could invite a sentence of wisdom from each one of you, what would you say? Let's go to you first, Leslie.
For me, really, it's about leveraging the possibilities of innovation to propel Asia to the next stage of its growth.
I love that word, propel Asia. Go ahead.
I think we have, in our generation, done fantastic things when it comes to relieving the world from poverty. I think we really should use those three words to continue to do that.
Obviously, these two gentlemen have a lot of things on mind when you are coming to Boao for participating in this year's forum. I hope there will be a lot of brainstorming and some real concrete result as the end of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Leslie, what a pleasure to see you here in Boao once again. Thank you so much. And with that, we're coming to the end of this special program of World Insight, coming to you from Boao. I'm Tian Wei, and on behalf of my team here in Boao and in Beijing, we would like to invite you again to our program. But for now, you can take a look at our YouTube channel, as well as look for us in Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. And with that, this is me, Tian Wei, bidding you goodbye from Boao.